Hello children, welcome to the class. Children, today we will start with a new unit, that is new lesson, the fourth lesson, that is the shadow. And this lesson is written by a famous writer by name Sir James Matthew Barrie. What is the author name? Sir James Matthew Barrie. Now let's see about him. Okay? Now, Sir James Matthew Barrie. When was he born? He was born on May 9 in the year 1860. And which place? Scotland. Now, what is he known for? So, Sir James Matthew Barrie is known for his novels, dramas, and children's literature and fantasy stories. And his famous works. What are his famous works? So, The Little White Bird and Peter Pan. This Peter Pan book or novel is very famous. So, he became a renowned writer through his book Peter Pan. Okay, and children, this our lesson also is taken from the Peter Pan novel. Okay, children, and when he died on 19th June in the year 1937. Did you get brief information, children, about our writer? So, our writer name is James Matthew Barrie. He was born on May 9th in the year 1860 and in the place Scotland. So he is known for his novels, dramas, children's literature and fantasy stories. And his famous works are The Little White Bird and Peter Pan and many more. So he became very famous through his novel Peter Pan. And he died on 19th June in the year 1937. Okay, now children, we'll move on to our lesson. And before going to our lesson, children, what do you mean by shadow? What do you mean by shadow? We all have shadows, right? Without shadow, no one is there in this earth. Everybody, every human being, animals, plants, everyone have their own shadows. Okay, now how you will make shadow? So when and if you keep an object, okay, between the light and the other object, then you will get a shadow, right? And we will enjoy by making different images through shadows, right? So, right, even we will try different images to make through shadows. So here also, this shadow is a lesson about a Peter Pan. So he loses his shadow. Okay, and how he get back his shadow, how will he get his shadow back to himself is read in this lesson, children. Okay, we'll move on to our lesson now. So, here they have given warm-up activity. You can try this, children, at home. They have given. Have fun with your shadow. Make shadow puppets with your hands. With the help of these pictures, they have given few pictures, and with the help of these pictures, even you can try to make the shadows. But put your hand in between some light and wall, the shadows will form on the wall. So if you keep your hands and between the light and the wall, you can make a shadow. Please do try, children, at home. Okay? Now you will enjoy. Now we'll move on to our lesson. Peter Pan is a special boy who never grows up and comes from a place called Neverland. He often visits the Darling family, Mrs. and Mr. Darling, and their children Wendy, Michael, and John. Without them knowing about it, one evening as he is sitting by the window of a room in the Darling home, the window is blown shut. Peter somehow escapes, but his shadow is trapped inside. Tinker Bell, a fairy who is Peter's friend, tells him that his shadow is in a drawer inside the room. Suddenly, the window was blown open by the wind. Peter rushed into the room through the open window to look for his lost shadow. He jumped at the drawers, scattering their contents to the floor with both hands. In a moment, he found his shadow inside the drawer. Peter had thought that he and his shadow, when brought near each other, would join like drops of water. And when they did not, he was shocked. He tried to stick on his shadow with soap from the bathroom, but that also failed. A shudder passed through Peter. He sat on the floor and cried. His soaps woke Wendy, and she sat up in bed. She was not worried to see a stranger crying in the room. She was only pleasantly interested. Boy, she said politely, why are you crying? Peter could be polite also, having learned the grand manners at fairy ceremonies, and he rose and bowed to her beautifully. She was much pleased and bowed beautifully to him from the bed. What's your name? He asked. Wendy Moria Angela Darling. She replied with some satisfaction. What is your name? Peter Pan. She was already sure that he must be Peter, but it did seem a short name compared to hers. Is that all? She asked him. Yes, he said rather sharply. He felt for the first time that his name was a shortest name. I'm so sorry, said Wendy Moria Angela. It doesn't matter, Peter gulped. She asked where he lived. Second to the right, said Peter, and then straight on till morning. What a funny address. Peter had a sinking feeling. For the first time he felt that perhaps it was a funny address. No, it isn't, he said. I mean, Wendy said nicely, remembering that she was the hostess. Is that way what they put on the letters? Don't get any letters, Peter said disapprovingly. But your mother get letters. Don't have a mother, he said. Oh, Peter, no wonder you are crying, she said, and got out of bed and ran to him. I wasn't crying about mothers, he said rather angrily. I was crying because I can't get my shadow to stick on. Besides, I wasn't crying. It has come off. Yes. Fortunately, Wendy knew at once what to do. It must be sewn on. I shall sew it on for you, my little man, she said. Though he was as tall as herself and got out her sewing bag and sewed the shadow onto Peter's foot. I dare say it will hurt a little, she warned him. Oh, I shan't cry, said Peter, who believed that he had never cried in his life. And he clenched his teeth and did not cry, and soon his shadow was behaving properly, though it was still a little creased. Perhaps I should have ironed it, Wendy said thoughtfully. But Peter was indifferent to appearances, and he was now jumping about in the wildest glee. Alas, he had already forgotten that he owed his happiness to Wendy. He thought he had attached the shadow himself. How clever I am, he cried rapturously. Oh, the cleverness of me. Okay, did you understand, children, what the lesson is about? Here there will be a boy by name Peter. He will lose his shadow, and he will, with the help of a girl by name Wendy, he will get back his shadow. And how he reacts when he gets back his shadow is seen in this lesson, children. Okay, now I will explain it briefly. Now, Peter Pan is a special boy who never grows up and comes from a place called Neverland. So Peter Pan is a boy. So this is an imaginary character. Okay. So he is a boy who will never grow up, or he will never become a big man. Okay, like others. So he will come from a place which is known as Neverland. And he often visits the Darling family. He visits the Darling family, and Mr. and Mrs. Darling and their children, Wendy, Michael and John. Okay, he will visit the Darling family very often without them knowing about it. Means how? Without knowing to Mr. and Mrs. Darling family, he will be visiting his family. One evening, as he is sitting by the window of a room in the Darling home, the window is blown shut. One day evening, when he was sitting near the window, sitting by the window, he will hear that. Okay, so he will hear that a window will be blown shut. Okay, so the windows will shut. Now what happens? Peter somehow escapes, but his shadow is trapped inside. The windows will be shut. Now somehow Peter will be escaped, but his shadow his shadow will be trapped. Now, Tinker Bell, a fairy who is Peter's friend, tells him that his shadow is in a drawer inside the room. Now what happens? The Tinker Bell. This is another character. It is a fairy and it is a best friend of Peter Pan. This fairy is a best friend of Peter Pan, and shadow of the Peter Pan will be stuck or will be trapped, and it will be in the drawer in the room. So it will be in the inside the drawer in the room. Children, this is an imaginary story, children. No one's shadow will be trapped. Our shadow will always be with us. Right? So this is an imaginary story. Suddenly the window was blown open by the wind. Peter rushed into the room through the open window to look for his lost shadow. When he came to know through a fairy that his shadow has been locked or been trapped in the drawer, so he'll be waiting for the windows to open. So once when the window was opened, Peter Pan will jump into the window and he will look for his shadow. So he will open the drawer and he will look for his shadow. He jumped at the drawers, scattering their contents to the floor with both hands. Children, there is a word scattering. What do you mean by scattering? Scattering means throwing things in different directions. Okay, scattering means you will be throwing, right, the things to different places. Same. Okay, scattering means throwing things in different directions. So, what the Peter Pan will do when he reaches the drawers, as soon as he opens the drawer, he will throw the things which was in the drawer to the different directions. In a moment, he found his shadow inside the drawer. Now, what happened? A few minutes later, he will find his shadow. Now, Peter had thought that he and his shadow, when brought near each other, would join like drops of water. Now, what Peter thought? When he found his shadow, he'll be very happy and he will think that if his shadow will be brought near him, the shadow will merge within him. Okay, so what he thinks? The shadow will merge within him like a drop of water. So when we add a drop of water, so when we collect the water, how the water will get mixed. Okay, so same way Peter also will think that. So when the shadow will be brought near to him, it will be merged in him. Okay, so it will join him. When they did not, he was shocked. Now what happened? When the shadow did not merge into his body, or when the shadow did not join to his body, he was shocked. Now he tried to stick on his shadow with soap from the bathroom, but that also failed. Now what happened? He tried many ways to stick the shadow to his body. Did it happen? Did he succeed? No, he also took the soap from the bathroom and he tried to stick. He tried to paste the shadow to his body, but he was failed. So what he did? He started to cry. Now a shudder passed through Peter. A shudder means he was shivered because he was shocked. Right? So what do you mean by shudder? Shudder means shiver or shaking. Okay, he shivered. He was shocked. And he sat on the floor and cried. And he sat on the floor and he started to cry. His sobs woke Wendy. Now what happened? Now his sobs means to cry loudly. So when he was crying loudly, there was a person in the same room, and the noise or the sound of the Peter Pan's cry will wake up the person. Who is that person? That person is a girl by name Wendy. Now, and she sat up in bed, and when she woke up by the cry of the Peter Pan, she sat up in bed. She was not worried to see a stranger crying in the room. She was not surprised to see a stranger. So, why? Because she was only pleasantly interested. Because she was very friendly. She was interested only in friendly nature. Right? Because Peter Pan, he was crying, so she did not show any interest. Why? She replied politely. Boy, she said politely, why are you crying? Now what she said, after seeing that Peter Pan was crying, so she will call him and she will ask, why are you crying? Peter could be polite also, having learned the grand manners at fairy ceremonies. and he rose and bowed to her beautifully. Now, by listening to the sound of the person, the Wendy, so even Peter Pan, so he has also learnt good manners in the fairy ceremony. Ceremonies means here celebrations. So even he has learnt good manners in his Neverland, in his celebration. So what he did when he listened, when he heard the sound of the person, he stood up, he rose, he stood up and he bowed to her beautifully. Now she was much pleased and bowed beautifully to him from the bed. Even same thing, Wendy also in reply, even she also bowed to Peter Pan. Means both, each of them showed respect towards them, okay, towards each other. Now, what's your name? He asked. Now, what Peter Pan asked? Peter Pan asked Wendy that what was her name. Wendy Moria Angela Darling. She said her name and she replied with some satisfaction, with happiness. Okay, what is your name? In return, she asked the Peter Pan what is his name. So he said Peter Pan. She was already sure that he must be Peter, but it did seem a short name compared to hers. Now what we can understand that, so Wendy has assumed before itself, when Peter Pan told his name, she assumed that his name might be Peter, but it seemed so short name when compared to her name. So her name was too long. So when Peter Pan told his name, she felt that his name is very short. Is that all? She asked him. Yes. Is that all? She said, is that your name? Yes, he said rather sharply. Now, yes, he said rather sharply means quite angrily, in a rough way. He felt for the first time that his name was a shortish name. For the first time, Peter Pan thought that his name was too short. Okay, because Wendy's name was too long, right? Wendy, Maria, Angela, Darling. So compared to Wendy's name, Peter Pan's name was very short. Now, I'm so sorry, said Wendy, Maria, Angela. Now, it doesn't matter, Peter gulped. Now, when Peter was feeling sad, when she asked, is that your name? Is that your name is too short? Peter Pan will become quite angry, and when she sees that unpleasant feeling in Peter Pan's face, so Wendy will ask sorry. Now Peter Pan will say, it's okay, it doesn't matter. Gulped. Now what do you mean by gulped? Gulped means swallowed quickly. He said, it's okay. And he said, that too quickly. Now she asked where he lived. Now, so second to the right, said Peter, and then straight on till morning. Now, when they came to know about each other's name, now Wendy asked the address of Peter Pan. Now he explained his address, and Wendy felt that it was very funny address. So first what he said? He said to the right and straight till morning. Means my house is towards the right of your house and you have to go straight till morning. So Wendy will feel little funny about the address. What a funny address. Peter had a sinking feeling. Now, what do you mean by sinking feeling? Sinking feeling means unpleasant feeling. Now he became very sad. So when Wendy told that his address seems very funny, so Peter Pan became very sad. Now for the first time even he felt that yes, his address was very funny. For the first time he felt that perhaps it was a funny address. No, it isn't, he said. Now Wendy said nicely, remembering that she was a hostess. Is that what they put on the letters? Now when Peter became very unpleasant by hearing the sentence told by Wendy that your address is seeming very funny, he'll become very sad. And he also said that no, it is not funny. Okay. Now he will say that no, it isn't funny, and then Wendy will remember that she is a person who is being only visited. She is not a friend of Peter Pan. So she doesn't have any right to talk or say any other negative words. Right. So here he will say it isn't, my address isn't very funny. And the Wendy will say, it's okay, sorry for that, and she will also ask him, is this your address which will be written on the letters? Don't get any letters, Peter said disapprovingly. Now what Peter will say? Wendy asks, is this your address will be written on the letters? Peter will say, no, you are not getting any letters. But your mother gets letters. He will say, you will not get any letters, but your mother will get letters. Don't have a mother, he said. Now he will ask, don't have a mother? Now what Peter will say? Oh Peter, no wonder you are crying, she said. Now she will leave that conversation and he will ask, or she will ask, oh Peter, why are you crying? And she got out of the bed and ran towards him. Now the conversation over and she started to have a friendly relationship with Peter Pan, and she will ask, Peter, why are you crying? And she will go near him. I wasn't crying about mothers, he said rather angrily. I was crying because I can't get my shadow to stick on. Besides, I wasn't crying. Now when Wendy asked Peter, why are you crying? Then Peter Pan will reply that, no, I wasn't crying for mothers. Right, I lost my shadow. So besides that, I was not crying anything. I am sad because I lost my shadow. It is not sticking to my body. So I am being little upset, but I am not crying. It has come off. Yes. Now, Wendy will ask, is it your shadow has come off from your body? Peter will answer, yes. Fortunately, Wendy knew at once what to do. It must be sewn on. I shall sew it on for you, my little man. Now, what Wendy will do? She understood what problem Peter is facing. Then she will say, okay, I have an idea. I will sew your shadow to your body. Okay, but it will pain. Okay, now she will bring the sewing machine and she will sew the shadow to the Peter Pan's body. Though he was as tall as herself and got out her sewing bag and sewed the shadow onto Peter's foot. Now what happened? So, Peter will bring the sewing machine to her from the room, and Wendy will stitch or sew the shadow to the Peter Pan's foot. I dare say it will hurt little, she warned him. Now what she said? When I will start to sew it, the shadow to your body, it will hurt you. Okay, now what the Peter will answer? I shan't cry. Now Peter will say, no, I will not cry because I want my shadow back. Who believed that he never cried in his life? Now Peter believed that he had never cried in his life, and he will say, I will never cry. And he clenched his teeth and did not cry. Now what do you mean by clenched his teeth? He hold his teeth tightly, and he was bearing the pain. And soon his shadow was behaving properly, though it was still a little creased. Now what happened? Now as the Wendy finished sewing the shadow to the Peter Pan's body, now the shadow started to behave properly how Peter was behaving. But a little untidiness was there. Now a little means the shadow was not in a proper way, though it was stitched to the Peter Pan's body. Okay. Perhaps I should have ironed it. Now what Wendy will say? Wendy will say, perhaps I might have, or I should have ironed the shadow. Wendy said thoughtfully, but Peter was indifferent to appearances, and he was now jumping about in wildest glee. Now he did not think about anything. He did not listen to Wendy. He started to jump in the wildest glee. Glee means here happy. So he started to feel happy. Alas, he had already forgotten that he owed his happiness to Wendy. Now what is happening? Alas. Alas means here showing an unpleasant feeling. Okay, showing the sadness. So what in turn, what he had given to Wendy? So when Wendy sewed the shadow of the Peter Pan to his body, in turn he gave his happiness to Wendy. Alas, he had already forgotten. He had forgotten that he had owed his happiness to Wendy. Since he had given his happiness to Wendy, in turn she stitched or she sewed the Peter Pan with his shadow. Now, he thought he had attached his shadow himself. Now, what he thought? He forgot what Wendy has done, what he has owed to Wendy, and he started to think that he himself has got back his shadow. And how clever, and he will start to praise himself that, oh, I am very clever and I have got my shadow by myself, and he will cry rapturously. He will cry means he will shout in a loud voice. Okay. Now, who cleverness? He will start to praise himself and to his cleverness. Did you understand, children, the lesson? So this lesson is about a shadow. Right. Here there will be a boy by name Peter Pan. So he is a boy who never grows, and he will come from the Neverland. So this is a fantasy story, children. This is an imaginative story. Right. Then where Peter Pan, he will often visit Darling family without knowing them. Okay. So without knowing the Darling family, he will often visit them in their house. So one day when he was sitting on the window, a window will be blown shut through because the wind was blowing too roughly. So he will be scared and he will jump out of the window, and he will escape. But his shadow will be trapped, and his shadow will be in the drawer. Okay, and when a fairy by name Tinkerbell, he will come and tell Peter Pan that his shadow is taking, or is protected, or he is taken place in the drawer in the room. Now what happened? Now Peter Pan was waiting for the windows to open. So when the window opened, now he will jump into the room, inside the room, and he will go near the drawer, and he will take all the things and he will throw out of the drawer into the different directions, and he will find his shadow. Now what he will think, Peter Pan? Peter Pan will think that if his shadow will be brought near to his body, he will think that his shadow will be joined to his body, like how the water will dissolve in the other substances. Same way, when his shadow will be brought to him, so he will think that his shadow will join to his body very easily. But did it happen? No, it did not happen. He tried many ways. He used soap also to stick the shadow to his body, but it did not happen. So when he got to know that his shadow is not sticking to his body, he was shocked. He became shocked and he started to shiver. So he couldn't think himself without his shadow. Now he started to cry. So when he started to cry very loudly, a person in the room will wake up. So that person was Wendy, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Darling. So now when she sees a boy is crying in her room, so she will not feel strange. Okay, she will not feel scared by seeing a stranger in her room. Okay, but instead she will talk in a friendly nature. Okay, she will talk to that boy in a friendly nature, and she will ask, why are you crying? What is your name? Okay, and they will both exchange their names, and this Wendy, she'll feel very funny about his name and his address. By her reply, so Peter Pan will become very sad, and Wendy will understand his unpleasantful feeling, and she will ask sorry. Okay, and Peter Pan will say, okay, it's never mind. And he will say that he has lost his shadow, and the Wendy will answer that she has an idea, and she will say that she will stitch. Okay, she will sew the shadow to the Peter Pan's foot, and she will also inform him or tell him that if when I am sewing, okay, it will hurt you. Peter Pan will say, it's okay, I will never cry. I will never cry because I have never cried in my life before. So when when Wendy started to sew the shadow to his body, he will hold his teeth very tightly. He clenches his teeth and he will bear the pain, and finally Wendy stitches the Peter Pan's shadow to his body. Now the shadow will behave properly, but little untidiness will be there. So what Wendy will say? Wendy will say that she might have ironed the shadow. Can you imagine to iron the shadow? No, this is just a story. Okay. So when she says that she might have ironed the shadow, here Peter Pan was very happy by getting his shadow back, and she will not listen anything to Wendy. And he will also forget that when Wendy told that she will stitch his shadow back to his body, so he owed his happiness to her. So he will give his happiness. He will give his happiness in return to Wendy, but he will forget as soon as he gets his shadow. Now he will start to jump all around with great happiness. And he will also praise himself, thinking about that he is very clever and he himself has got back his shadow. Okay, did you understand, children? Yes, I hope you have understood. In the next class, we will do the textbook activity. Okay, children? Thank you, children.